Good afternoon and welcome to our webcast on the Ferno Injury-Free Program. My name is Jerry Sosha, Director of Marketing for Ferno. One of my guests today is Bryan Fass with the Fit Responder. Bryan, how are you doing today?
I'm well, Jerry. Yourself?
Great. And my other guest is Tom Cox, our Director of Education and Training. Tom, how are you doing?
Great, Jerry. Thanks.
Fantastic. Well, again, today we're here to talk to you about our new injury-free program. Ferno Injury-Free is an ergonomic training program that's been designed to teach you safe lifting and patient handling practice out in the field. We cover ergonomics as well as health and wellness and fitness. And all of this has been designed from an EMS perspective. All of the content is available as videos that you can find on YouTube or through our Ferno Injury-Free site, which will give you access to our new injury-free application for iTunes and Android. And we'll talk a little bit later in this presentation about how you can download those. Now, Bryan, as you developed the Fit Responder program, I understand you've got a strong background in EMS, and maybe you could share with our audience a little bit more about that.
Yeah, Jerry. I started off as an EMT, and I went back to school, and like a lot of you, ended up getting my paramedic. I functioned at the paramedic level for over 8 years in a large, busy, urban 911 system in Charlotte, North Carolina.
Great. Now, I understand you also have a clinical background. Is that correct?
I do. My undergraduate degree is actually in sports medicine. I'm a certified and licensed athletic trainer. I'm a certified and strength and conditioning specialist. My specialty is actually chronic pain, spine rehab, postural rehabilitation, and sports performance.
That's great. Now, Tom, you also have an EMS background as well, correct?
I do, Jerry. I was a paramedic in another large urban area, Peoria, Illinois, for about 5 years, and I've worked for EMS companies for about 20 years.
That's great. Now, Bryan, with your EMS background, with your clinical background, you were out in the field and you saw a lot of injuries happening with your EMS colleagues, and that led you to develop the Fit Responder program. And maybe talk about what you were seeing that led you to develop the program.
Absolutely. You know, it was interesting. As a clinician, I stepped into EMS functioning as a paramedic almost as an outsider. Even though I was a medic, I was trained by other medics on how to be a medic. And I can recall instances during my training where I was taught how to lift things or transfer patients that biomechanically and ergonomically really didn't make a lot of sense. And that started the framework for eventually what became the Fit Responder program.
Tom, talk a little bit about what Ferno what's important to Ferno with training and what led us to bring the injury-free program into being.
First and foremost, we want you to know how to use our equipment. But more importantly, we want you to know how to use it properly. Our main interest is your health and longevity.
Great. Now, Bryan, I'm curious, and I'm sure our audience is, what are some of the most common injuries that you see in EMS as you're out in the field?
You know, as we all know, back injuries are the #1 factor for leaving the profession. But what a lot of us don't realize is it's not the big heavy lift or the awkward biomechanics always that hurt us. A lot of times it's doing normal things. What happens is our tissue, our muscular system, gets so chronically fatigued, both posturally and from a mechanical standpoint, that we get hurt doing normal things. As an example, we go to pick up the monitor or gear bag, and you sustain a major injury doing something normal.
Right. Now, what can an individual do to prevent some of these injuries?
You know, as an individual, wellness is key. And when I say wellness, I'm talking about nutrition, sleep, exercise is paramount. We've got to be fit. We've got to keep our bodies primed for the job. Slowing down. One of the biggest things we see with our training is getting medics and firefighters to simply slow down and think a couple steps ahead when it comes to using their tools and their bodies.
Bryan, what about agencies? What can agencies do to help prevent injuries?
That's a great question. From an agency standpoint, it all comes down to training and your products. When I'm talking about training, I'm not talking about just that once a year ergonomics and patient handling refresher. I'm talking about every single month having ergonomic and equipment handling training modules, if you want to call them that, built into the curriculum. And on top of that, obviously, using the best tools that you can possibly get to make your job easier.
And that's a big part of why we developed the injury-free program, is to give people easy access out in the field mobily to a lot of that content, correct?
Absolutely.
Great. Well, we'd like to demonstrate for you some of the techniques we have in injury-free. And as we go on, you may have questions. You can use the chat feature in the lower right-hand portion of your screen to send those questions in to us, and we'll get to them toward the end of our session. So, Tom, Bryan, maybe you could demonstrate some of these techniques for us.
Love
Glad
to.
to.
Absolutely. One of the first things that comes to mind when it comes to training is a deep lift from the floor. So whether it be a spine board lift or picking a patient up off the floor, it doesn't matter. This is the most dangerous movement we do. Any lift that we do below the knees is one of the number one causes of spine load and injury possible. So there's a couple key points that we want you to be aware of. Number one, get as close to the board as possible. I know in certain circumstances this is not always feasible or easy, but you want to do it. Get as close as possible. Get a nice wide base of support, probably about shoulder width or slightly wider. Always, always make sure that your feet are glued to the floor. The better the contact to the ground, the better the drive you get off your hips. Always with good eye contact with my partner and good communication. We're going to squat down, keeping our backs perfectly flat, perfectly straight, our heels and feet perfectly flat on the floor. And with good communication, 1, 2, 3, lift. We should come straight up, neither one of us having any additional movement. A lot of times you'll see this kind of a seesaw movement. That means somebody lifted the board from too far back. That means they were lifting with their back and they're throwing their partner off balance. Our stretcher is nearby, and it is at a load height where neither one of us has to bend down while we place the spine board onto the stretcher, therefore keeping some strain off of our back. What we're going to do is take some small steps to the stretcher. I'm going to block the wheel with my leg, and my partner is going to slowly pivot the head end of the spine board onto the stretcher with no load on his spine. At this point, all I need to do, using my hips to drive, is push the board over, avoiding flexion rotation patterns, which are a major cause of injury. From here, we're going to secure our patient to the stretcher. Now, for demonstration purposes, we're going to skip that step today. Obviously, use all of your patient restraint devices. When picking up a stretcher, just like a spine board, irregardless of stretcher height, we want to follow the same steps. Wide base of support, feet firmly glued to the floor. Hips are going to drop, head up, shoulders back. I'm as close to the object as possible. With good communication, 1, 2, 3, lift. From here, we're going to bring our stretcher to the patient compartment of the ambulance. And there's a couple of other key points I want you to be very aware of when loading the stretcher into the ambulance. Obviously, there's lots of stuff we have to work around. The length of the patient, the width of the carriage on the stretcher. Get a nice wide base of support again, pulling back off the safety catch, using the lower handles. Hips are down, head is up, shoulders are back. And if I do this lift properly, what you're going to notice is that the stretcher comes straight into my abdomen, forcing my strong core muscles to fire, taking load off of my spine. Head up, shoulders back, and I'm just going to tell myself 1, 2, 3, lift. I come straight in, and from here, I narrow my stance slightly, cue my partner to go ahead and retract the carriage, and at this point, I can effortlessly load the patient into the ambulance. We see a similar problem when coming out of the ambulance, and we're looking at two different situations here. Number one, with the patient on it, but number two, when the stretcher is unloaded, there is no patient on it. Good news is the faulty mechanics are the same. What we want to think about is this. We tend to walk backwards on a tightrope as we're taking the stretcher out. And what it forces us to do is use our spines exclusively to place the stretcher on the ground. So, as I bring the stretcher out, keeping it close in contact with my body, my partner's going to go ahead and place the wheels down on the ground, and you notice I'm still on that tightrope. So it's going to force me to set the stretcher down using my back. That was all spine. What we would prefer to see is at this point, widen your stance just a little bit. Head is up, shoulders are still back, and I'm going to use my hips to set the stretcher down, keeping all the load and the strong hip muscles and off of my back. And from this point, bring the patient to the hospital and begin their care.
Bryan and Tom, thanks for that great demonstration. I hope in the audience you found that information very useful, and hopefully that'll help you be more safe out in the field. Now at this time, again, we'd like to open up to questions from you. You can use the chat feature in the lower right-hand portion of your screen to send those questions in. And Bryan, I see we've got a few questions that already have come in. The first question is from Kelly, and I'm 5'10". Bryan, I think you're about 5'9". Kelly says she's about 5'1", and she wants to know if there's any special techniques for shorter operators that would be different from some of what you've shown.
You know, Jerry, that's a question that I get asked every single training class that I teach, and I wish there was an easy answer to it. Let me show you what a lot of folks do, and then I'll show you a solution to that problem. What a lot of people are going to do is, and I don't know if this is one of those things that just has lived in EMS for a long time, they tend to kind of eyeball the height of the patient compartment, and then in one movement, they're going to get real low, kind of match their bodies up to it. They're twisted, looking at that angle. They got feet in their face, and then they pop the stretcher up as fast as they can. Or a lot of times they're going to pick it up and they try to jump the wheels over the threshold into the patient compartment. A preferred technique, which is one most folks haven't thought about, is doing the lift in 2 steps. Step 1 is the traditional lift, and step number 2 is what I call walking the cot up the body. I'll demonstrate, and keep in mind this is really, really hard to demonstrate via video. This is a hands-on learning technique. So same fashion we've done before. Wide base of support, hips are down, head is up, shoulders back, abs are tight, lifting with my hips. Now from here, I'm going to narrow my stance, go down into a miniature squat till the bottom bar hits my legs. From here, one big move, driving from my legs, not my upper body. I walk the stretcher up my abdomen. This way, I can keep moving it up and have no problem with the angle of the stretcher entering the patient compartment.
That was really helpful, Bryan. We have another question from Dave. Dave is asking, I have trouble keeping my feet flat when lifting. Is there anything he can do to help with that?
You know what, that's an awesome question. There's a number of biomechanical reasons why a medic or a firefighter has difficulty keeping their feet flat on the ground, and this again is something we address extensively in our training. The simplest thing I would tell you to do, refer back to the injury-free program. Refer back to the app. There's an entire section in the injury-free program that we wrote and designed that teaches stretches that will allow your body to get into these positions that we're talking about.
Great. Another question from Sean. Are there any exercises that can help me with lifting?
You know, there's a ton of exercises that can help you with lifting. Again, refer back to the injury-free program and the injury-free applications. We designed an entire exercise protocol from body weight exercises to resistance bands that we can tether and strap to the back of the ambulance, where we can do simple but very, very effective exercises on duty and in uniform to make sure that you can do these sometimes awkward and difficult lifts safely.
Bryan, I think you made a great point there, and one of the things I appreciate about what you've done with the injury-free program is it's all from an EMS perspective. So even when we're talking about health and wellness, nutrition, exercise, it's all things that are not just from an EMS perspective, but it's what you can do at the station or even in the ambulance. So you don't have to be in a gym or in a different lifestyle, because we all know everybody works long shifts and has other factors that make these things difficult.
Absolutely.
Great. So I see another question coming in from Chris. He'd like to know, is it possible to do a deadlift demo and how to keep both EMTs steady?
A deadlift demo. Well, Chris, if I'm reading your question correctly, you're talking about hopefully deadlifting the, I'm hoping it's a deadlift exercise or deadlift of the board. Best way to talk about a deadlift, if you're talking about exercise technique, and it really does apply into lifting a board or a stretcher, a couple simple things. Number 1 is base of support. We want to get wide. Not too wide, but shoulder width per se. Toes externally rotated just a little bit. Now there's one of the ways I like to teach any lift, and again, it's dependent on the equipment that you have, is to always try to lift in a power grip or a powerlifting grip. Now, I'm not saying over-under like traditional powerlifting, but to be able to go down with the hips, grab a hold of the board or the stretcher, head up, shoulders back, and driving through the floor, which is a great way to think about it, drive through the floor to get it done. I see we have a clarification on the question, lifting the cot off the floor. Let's pull it out and show you. All right, we're going to drop it all the way down. 1, 2, 3. Take it down to its lowest level. Okay. Similar to a spine board lift, we want to follow the same exact techniques. Wide base of support, excellent communication and visualization with my partner. Get your hips low, but your back flat. Another way to think about it is imagine that you have a broomstick on your back. If I go down to a proper lift position, I don't have a broomstick on my back right now. It's rolled off. But here, I'm nice and straight and level. With good communication, 1, 2, 3, lift. And again, in that fashion, we're able to lift vertically. The strain is reduced on our spine, and our hips are taking the majority of the load.
Bryan, we have another question coming in on bariatric lifting. Are there any special techniques or things we ought to keep in mind as we're doing that?
You know, bariatric lifting is a big topic nowadays. I wish there was a straight, solid answer I could give you. First and foremost is your tools. Use your tools. Use equipment to do as much of the work as possible. One of the things I teach in my training is, guys, assuming your patient is stable, and you know what your definition of stable is. If your patient is stable, slow down. Call in additional resources. Move things out of the way, think of ways around the issue so that the tools are doing the work, not you. It's the safest way to handle a bariatric patient.
Bryan, I think another thing we can add on behalf of Ferno relative to bariatric patient handling with equipment, we always want to see you keep the equipment as low as possible to keep the center of gravity down. So most bariatric equipment, including Ferno cots, are designed to support heavy loads, but to stay in the lowest position and still be able to maneuver.
That's a great point, yep.
There's also pieces of equipment that Ferno offers to support the load. We have specifically a large body surface which supports the wider body of a heavy patient, and that again helps with stability of the cot. It keeps that fluid mass from moving around. So techniques in conjunction with equipment are very important.
Absolutely. And to embellish that point, when it comes to any type of bariatric movement, whether you're in a supported squat-based stance or you have to go into more of a lunge-based stance where we've had to go forward over an object, the techniques that we talk about in the injury-free program and the techniques that we went over today are exactly the same. Always have a foot firmly glued, or the other way I like to describe it is rooted to the floor. Always have your head up, always have your shoulders back, and you should never lift, move, push, pull, transfer, or carry without making sure your abdominal wall is tight. So the way we teach it in our classes is when in doubt, push out. That way at least you've given your body a fighting chance from a muscular standpoint, and you're using the tools to your best advantage.
A lot of what Bryan has shared with you today is available in the injury-free program. Bryan, you also take this out on the road and deliver a lot of this content in live training sessions for agencies, correct?
I do, Jerry. Actually, the majority of my time is spent traveling around the country working with services, everything from some of what we reviewed today, patient handling ergonomics, equipment handling. I teach tactical fitness classes, fireground fitness classes, EMS fitness, wellness, nutrition, the whole gambit of keeping public safety employees healthy.
Great. If you'd like more information on how to bring Bryan Fass and the Fit Responder to your agency, you can visit thefitresponder.com and you'll find Bryan's contact information there. We're going to go ahead and start to wind up today. If we didn't get to any of your questions, we will email a response within 24 hours. You can also continue to use the chat feature or email us if you have additional questions. Now, if you'd like to watch today's presentation again or share it with friends and colleagues, you can go to YouTube and search Ferno EMS, and you'll find a recording of this video available there. You can also visit fernoinjuryfree.com to find recordings of this session, as well as all of the video content from the injury-free program. At that website, you will also find links to be able to download the iPhone and Android application for your smartphone or tablet. We also have a forum there if you'd like more information on the injury-free program, on Ferno training programs, or just have general questions, again, use that form. We'd like to thank you for your time today and have a great afternoon.